Thank you for being here. We're going to talk about leading a self-organizing team, trying to dispel the myth that project managers, scrum masters, and such with self-organizing teams do nothing more than buy pizza and get out of the way. There's definitely more to do on a self-organizing team. My name is Mike Cohn. Hope to get a chance to talk with you more through the rest of the NDC. Here's our agenda. We're going to talk about self-organization and something called subtle control. We're going to talk about something called containers, differences, and exchanges, how those can be used to influence self-organization. And we're going to talk about influencing how the team evolves. Teams are not static things that stay in one place, they evolve. So we'll talk about how to influence that evolution. So we'll start out with what self-organization is. In my mind, self-organization is a response to a challenge. Someone external to the team throws a challenge out to the team, and the team responds to that challenge. Self-organization does not mean that the team gets to pick that challenge. They don't choose the goal they're going to pursue. Right? The team is given that goal. There was a question posed to a list of Scrum trainers a little bit ago that kind of bothered me because most of the Scrum trainers got it wrong. The question was, does a product owner have the right to tell a team what the product owner needs and when? And over half the Scrum trainers who responded said no. The product owner, that chief stakeholder, gets to tell the team one of the three things: what I want, when I want it, how much it's going to cost, something like that. They don't get to specify multiple things. So a product owner does not get to say, I want this, I need it by that date. And that answer was wrong. A product owner on a Scrum team or a key stakeholder on an Agile project does get to tell the team more than that. Right? I don't have any doubt about this. I know this because one of the very first Scrum projects ever was a project done at Fuji Xerox in the early 80s. And this project, the product owner on the project went to the team and said, I need a new photocopier. Fuji Xerox made photocopiers. Said, I need a new photocopier that works at today's state of the art, sells for half the price of the current model, and is available in 2 years. And the article on this describes the team as kind of grumbling and moaning about this, saying, can't be done, no way, no way. And then eventually they said, what if we tried this? What if we did this? Yeah, if we did that, that would work. Yeah, and we use this new toner that's coming out. Oh, no, that won't work. Okay, but what if we did this? And the article talks about it and says at that point, the product owner essentially had won. The team had come to own the problem. So self-organization is a response to a problem, right? We self-organized already today. You guys have already self-organized at least once. One thing you did is you self-organized into this room. Right? Our hosts here at NDC set up a challenge for you where to sit, right? And we had to self-organize. They could have done it differently. It would have been nice if they'd given us kind of round tables, but then they can't fit as many people in here, right? But that would have been a different self-organization challenge. They gave us a little bit of a weird challenge that they've got these nice seats in the middle, but no screen, right? So we had to optimize on whether you wanted to look at me or whether you wanted to look at the slides, right? So we had a self-organization problem. Not much of a problem, but we did have one this morning. So self-organization, a response to a challenge, right? Managers, product owners, scrum masters, leaders in the organization help influence, determine what that challenge is going to be. Right? Now, when we think about a team, teams are absolutely what are called a complex adaptive system, or a CAS, a complex adaptive system. And if we look at a definition for a complex adaptive system, it's a dynamic network of many agents acting in parallel and acting and reacting to each other. Hopefully that sounds like a typical team. If we think about a 7-person team, it's a dynamic network of agents. They're acting and reacting to each other. Right? On a CAS, on a complex adaptive system, control is dispersed and decentralized. Right? We don't have all decisions being made by the one big brain. Right? That type of decision making is dispersed. So when we look at some examples of complex adaptive systems, we'd see some of these. We'd see things like ant hives and bee colonies. Actually, I got those the other way around, ant colonies and beehives. Right? We'd look at those. I think of complex adaptive systems. I think of something like a group queuing up to go into a concert or a theater. I remember I was at a Jimmy Buffett concert last year. Some of you probably know Jimmy Buffett, Margaritaville singer. Right? And there were two distinct clumps of people. There were some of us who were lined up to get in to get good seats. It was all open seating. And so some of us were lined up to get in and get good seats. The others were lined up at the tequila bar, right? Complex adaptive system, right? And there was just kind of a structuring of ourselves. There was no organization to it other than what you preferred. Teams are definitely complex adaptive systems, especially agile teams where we have very little high-level leadership. The team is given a challenge. They don't have a hierarchy of leaders. Now, when we have a project like this, one of the things I want to think about is that control, exerting control or influence over such a group is not evil. Right? Control is not evil. Our hosts at NDC today, I do not think they were evil by putting the chairs in here this way. They thought about how many people they had signed up, they thought about the room, they thought about the best way, and they structured the tables in the chairs in the best combination of ways. If only 18 people signed up for NDC, we might have had big comfy recliners and tables, round tables, right? But they look at it and they did their best to influence us in a good way. So exerting influence or control over a group is not an evil thing. When I get on the highway and drive, I have to stay on a particular side of the road. I don't find that evil. I find it somewhat helpful for keeping alive, right? So control's not bad, right? Control's not bad. We often kind of rebel against it and we think it is, but it's not, right? So it's okay to have rules and incentives added by managers, leaders, scrum masters, product owners, project managers, whoever you want to think about. It's okay for these individuals to add influence onto us in the rules or such that they place. We do have to be careful as leaders in an organization that we don't go too far. We put too many rules in place and a team shuts down. Now, sometimes I feel a little bit alone in this thinking, so I want to share a couple of thoughts to show that I'm not alone in this thinking. This is a great book called The Biology of Business. It's a collection of essays. One of the essays by a guy named Philip Anderson. Here's what he had to say. He said, self-organization does not mean that workers, instead of managers, engineer an organization design. It does not mean letting people do whatever they want to do. He says, instead, it means that management commits to guiding the evolution of behaviors. Think about that, evolution of behaviors, that emerges from interaction of independent agents, instead of specifying in advance what effective behavior is. So management here somewhat leaves the team to figure out what effective behavior is. They set up the goals and they leave the team to figure out what is the best way to achieve those goals. Right? We look at one other quote, actually two other quotes here. This next one I want to share with you is from the very first article on Scrum. First article on Scrum, one of the leading Agile processes. About 70% of people doing Agile do Scrum. Here's a quote from the very first article on that. And the authors here wrote, although project teams are largely on their own, they are not uncontrolled. Said management establishes enough checkpoints to prevent instability, ambiguity, and tension from turning into chaos. Ken Schwaber, who's kind of the godfather of Scrum, has talked about Scrum as being kind of the act of controlling chaos, right? You're just on the edge of crossing over into chaotic activity. So at the same time, management avoids the kind of rigid control that impairs creativity and spontaneity. We want to have just enough control that we don't go into either direction. We don't get too rigid, too much control. We don't let things turn chaotic. Last one. It's from an early Agile book in 1990. They wrote, to be sure, control is still exercised, but it is subtle and much of it is indirect. So Agile teams, self-organizing teams are still under control. They're under influence, but it's subtle and indirect. Right? It's not us forcing them to do things. You must do this. I say this. You have to do this. Right? So it's subtle and indirect control, subtle and indirect influence. So what we're not talking about here is being deceptive or sneaky. I don't want to hide this from a team. I'm sorry, this thing is driving me crazy. It's staying on one ear and not on the other, and I got to figure this thing out. So we're not talking about being deceptive or misleading to the team. We're not talking about lying to them. We are talking about setting things up. Right? It was no lie to you that our host said from NDC set the chairs up in here. Right? We know they did it for our benefit. Right? So the control that we're going to exert is maybe not something that we're going to broadcast, but we're not going to necessarily hide from a team that some of it may be going on. That all sounds philosophical. Here's what I mean about this. I may have a team that I do not think is working well together. And I may put another person on that team because they bring a different decision-making style to that team. They bring a different decision-making style, and I think that's going to help the team. Well, if the team comes to me and says, hey, why did you put this other person on our team? I don't necessarily want to tell them, because I don't like your decision-making style and they have a different one. Right? Because that's going to undermine the impact that person's going to have. Right? So I may not broadcast why all of the interventions I take with the team are there. Oh, I'm putting them there to change your decision-making style. Right? You will not. Right? That'll just reinforce their behavior and they'll fight me on that. Right? So I may not broadcast why I do those things, but I don't feel like I'm being sneaky or deceptive. And what I mean by that is 3 years later, they come to me and say, hey, why'd you put that person on our team? Oh, you had a different decision-making style than I thought was helpful. You guys were very quick to decide. I wanted to add somebody who was a little bit more deliberate in their decision-making style, and so I added whoever to your team. I'll be happy to tell them a couple years later, but I'm not just going to broadcast it. If I broadcast it, it's going to kind of defeat the purpose, right, in some cases. So I'm not talking about being sneaky or deceptive here. I don't ever want to feel like I'm lying to my team or sneaking around behind their backs. I'm doing things, I'm intervening with the team for their own good, but I may not broadcast the reasons in advance. Okay? I want to talk about this idea of containers, differences, and exchanges. The idea here is that for self-organization to occur, there are three things that are necessary. The three things that are necessary are a container, some differences, and some exchanges. This is based on, these ideas here are based on the PhD research and other writings from a woman named Glenda E. Young, who studied self-organization. And so she says that we need to have a container. Now, a container can be lots of different things. A container can be a physical boundary. Our room today is a container. A container could be more of a conceptual boundary, the project that we are on, right? A container can be semi-physical. It can be the campus we're on. We are in the Oslo campus of our company, right? There's also a part of our campus, part of our company in Beijing, right? So it might be physical. It might be more just kind of conceptual, right? I am part of the American team. Right? I'm working in Oslo, but I'm one of the Americans. Right? That might be a different container that we're on. So any person may be in a handful or more containers on a project. But there has to be something that bounds us. Think about me telling you about people going to the Jimmy Buffett concert. Right? They go to this music concert. Right? They had to be in the same physical place. That was their container, right, for self-organization to occur. We have to be in this room for self-organization to occur. There's got to be something that we have that bounds us together. The next thing that we need differences. If we were all the same, how we organized, how we self-organized wouldn't really matter. So we have to have some differences amongst us. Now, anytime we're talking about humans, that's fairly pretty much a given. We are going to have differences. Right? The differences can come in all sorts of ways. They can be technical differences, can be knowledge differences, knowledge of the technology, knowledge of the domain. It could be the experience, could be our gender, could be our power in the organization, could be our educational level, our years of experience, right? Our network within the organization. All those type of things will differ, right? As humans, we're going to have plenty of differences, but we need those in order for self-organization to occur. We also need what she called transforming exchanges. A transforming exchange is where one or more of these agents, in our case humans generally, I don't mean that as a joke, I mean sometimes the agents can be groups. The QA department talks to the programming department. Right? So when agents talk, there have to be transforming exchanges. Right? I go talk to my chief architect, and my chief architect tells me a good way to design a solution. I leave educated. That was a transforming exchange. I go down to the human resources department and get my paycheck. That was a transforming exchange, right? A good one, right? So any sort of exchange here where something is going to influence what you do next, knowledge, information, motivation. I go talk to my product owner, and my product owner tells me about an amazing site visit she just had with a client. I leave motivated. Right? I'm excited about this project. I cannot wait for this to get out in people's hands. So that's a transforming exchange. So containers, differences, exchanges. 3 things that influence how we self-organize. Now, if those things influence how we self-organize, we can use them. We can use them to influence how a team self-organizes, right? And we're going to want to use these in good ways. So one of the things that we can do is we can introduce or remove containers. We can enlarge a container, shrink a container, right? We can influence the differences. Right, I gave an example of where I was introducing a difference on a team. I said I had a team who had a particular decision-making style. And I gave the example, they rushed to decide. Right? I have some teams that I work with who rush to decide. They don't talk about things, in my opinion, thoroughly enough. They're very quick to decide. And so I might want to slow that down. I introduce a difference on that team by bringing somebody onto that team who makes decisions in a different way. Right? They're a little bit more deliberate, maybe too deliberate. Maybe that's the right balance. So I'm introducing a difference there. An exchange. I may have people talk to each other who aren't talking today. I introduce a new exchange into the team, right? And by introducing that new exchange, that team may self-organize a slightly different way. Now, notice I use the word may there. What we're talking about here is intervening with the team. I'm going to intervene with the team. I'm going to introduce a new container or ask for a new exchange to occur. I'm intervening with the team. I do not know how that will happen, how that will result. Right? I put a new intervention in with the team. I do not know how they will respond. Right? For example, I may ask a team to start pair programming. I've done that a lot. I have a pretty good idea how a team will respond to pair programming, but I do not know how this team will respond to pair programming. They may respond in a predictable way, may not. So we have to take a series of educated guesses as we make these interventions with a team. Right? We're trying to help a team get better and better in terms of how they self-organize. We're not doing this just for our fun. We're trying to help the team be better. But any one intervention, I'm taking a little bit of an educated guess as to how that team will respond to my intervention. Okay? We're going to do an exercise here shortly where I'm going to ask you to think about how you might intervene with a few teams. Before I do that, I want to show a few more things that we can do as part of these containers, differences, and exchanges. So here we go. With containers, I can enlarge or shrink the team. I can make the team bigger or smaller. All right, this team is not working well together. Let's make it a little bit smaller. All right, let's let the 6-person team figure out how to work together. Then I'll add 2 people back. The 8 people not getting along, it's not working out. Maybe I need to make the team bigger. Right? Maybe it's a 7-person team. I want to add 2 people. Right? So changing the size of the team will, of course, change how they work together. I can shrink the responsibility boundaries. Here's a real example. I had a team that was responsible for getting some software done, and their definition of done included hand it off to the sysadmin group. The sysadmin group would deploy the software. Right? And they were giving the software to the sysadmins in a state that was not very deployable. Right? The system administrators had too much work figuring out how to actually deploy this. It was too manual. It was very hard for the system administrators to do across a couple of thousand servers. And so we expanded the scope of responsibility for that team. I told them their job was not to just hand it to the system administrators. Their job was to get it deployed with the system administrators' help. Right? So I increased the scope of their responsibilities, not just have it ready to be deployed, but actually deployed. Changed how they self-organized. They now had a larger scope of responsibility. Change team membership, maybe not even changing size. Just take one person out, add another person. That will certainly change how we self-organize. Create new teams or groups, right? Introduce a new group, split a team into 2, things like that would be examples of changing our containers. Let's look at changing differences. Some of the things we can do here. Talk to a team and have them, encourage them or ask them to make their decisions a different way. Some teams feel like they have to have consensus on every decision. We all have to agree. Right? Maybe that works out great for some teams, maybe not for others. So with a team that is struggling with this, maybe I can encourage them to use a different decision-making style. Look, do we really have to agree on everything? Right? Maybe we can just do a typical kind of thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs neutral type of thing. And as long as nobody is saying thumbs down, we'll go with this decision. There's other techniques called things like fists of 5 and things like this. Maybe I can go to an approach where we don't quite require consensus. Right? Getting some sort of discussion going there in a different way. Right? I'm a big fan of, I got the word or the phrase up there, fierce debate. I'm a big fan of having fierce debate about things. Let's come, have a fierce debate about this. Let's figure it out, and then we'll agree, we'll move on, right? Not everybody on the team may have to support that. Maybe I have another team who is doing the opposite, and I want to push them to have consensus. Do not make a decision unless every one of you agree. One of the things I probably spend half my life doing when I'm consulting is asking questions, right? What could go wrong if we chose this? What other 3 decisions did we rule out? Why is this decision better than that one? What was your second best decision, right? So I will ask a lot of questions like that. Early in my career when I was learning how to be a manager, I actually wanted to become proficient at asking these types of questions. What I started to do, I'd go into meetings and I would actually track on my fingers how many times I made a statement versus how many times I asked a question, making sure I asked more questions than I made statements in those meetings. Right? So asking hard questions of a team will bring out whether they agree or disagree. Now, it won't stay on either ear. Right? So one of the things that you can do is to try to bring out the differences among team members by asking those hard questions. Right? Last one, our exchanges. We need transforming exchanges. Here's something I did that was a lot of people would think was very non-agile. And those of you who know me know I'm very agile. I kind of live and breathe to help agile teams. And here's something I did that a lot of people would accuse me of having done that was very non-agile. I had a Scrum team, and I told them that I wanted all of their key architectural decisions to be reviewed by an architect who was not really over their team. He was just kind of architect in the company, senior guy in the company, but he wasn't like responsible for their team. And I said, I want all of your decisions run by Todd. Right? I want you to take all of your decisions to him and make sure he approves of your big architectural decisions. Then I went over to Todd and I talked to him and I explained what I was doing. And I said, I'm going to have this team run all their architectural decisions by you. And I said, I'd like you to look out for them making big mistakes. But mostly I want you to be here as somebody scary. Right? I want this team to have to worry about, we have to go present this to Todd. And that would make them think through their decisions more thoroughly, right? They would be more prepared. They wouldn't rush to decide, and they would be more thorough, which is something I wanted out of this team. And I told Todd, I said, I don't really want you to overrule them very often. I said, of course, do so if you think they're about to make a big mistake. But I said, the biggest thing I want you to do is just to ask them some of those hard questions and intimidate them, right? Make sure they come to you prepared. Right? But if they're giving you good answers and you can tell they've thought about it, that's probably good enough. Right? So here I was. I kind of slowed this team down, a non-agile thing to do. Right? I made them go get approval on their big architectural decisions. Right? But I did it for their good. I did it to get better results out of what they were doing. So I would still support what I did there, even though it may look like a non-agile thing. But it was an exchange that I introduced. Right? I introduced a new exchange into this team. Sometimes you can look at this and say, who's talking that shouldn't be? Who do we have not talking who should be? Right? And we can introduce new exchanges into the mix. Okay? What I'd like to do is do a little exercise here where you get a chance to intervene with some teams. Oh my God, this thing is going to kill me. Here's what I'd like you to do. Here's an example. So suppose you are a Scrum Master or coach for an Agile team. The next couple slides, these are what are on the handout. They describe some teams that are having some troubles. What I'd like you to do, I'll let you self-organize into a couple of groups, those next to you, and discuss these problems. We'll do the first one here together, and then I'll let you pick one or two to each talk about. So what I'd like you to do is to figure out how you would intervene with this team and whether that intervention is a change in container, difference, or exchange. Okay? So here's an example. Let's talk about number 1 here. We've got a team that has 4 programmers, 2 testers, database engineer, and you. The programmers and testers are not working well together. Programmers work in isolation until 2 days are left in the iteration. Then they throw the code over the wall to the testers. Anybody have an idea of what you might change here and whether that's a change in container, difference, or exchange? What might you change here? I'm sure some people have been in this situation. Yes?
The container, change the container. So integrate
Okay, so get the programmers and testers integrated better, right? Change the container, right? One way we might do that, maybe they're not sitting close enough to each other. Maybe I need to set programmer, tester, like a dinner party or something, right? Get them more integrated in their container that way. Other thoughts on things we might do? Yes, thank you.
Programmer should be responsible for the test too.
Yeah, yeah. What would that be? A change in container, difference, or exchange?
Responsibility.
The container. Yeah. Yeah, when we change the responsibilities to change the container. So now the programmers are not responsible for write good code. They're responsible for write high quality code. Esther?
Well, first, I want to know more about what's going on in this
Of course.
before I made a decision on where to proceed. But the example that was just given, changing responsibility, is also dampening a difference. It's saying we don't have these distinct roles between I'm a tester and you're a developer. So anytime you change one, you're influencing the other.
That's an excellent point. Thank you. We're all of these, we're going to want to know more information. We're just going to have to make some guesses with half a page of information on these things. But you're absolutely right. Very often, if not always, when we change one of these things, there will be ancillary effects. Right? I change the container. I have an influence, as Esther pointed out, on terms of the differences here. I'm no longer programmer and tester. I'm team member when we make that type of change. Right? So when we go through these, I want you to think about which one you think it's primarily is. Right? I think I'm primarily changing a container. One of the things that you can think about is if you see something that is, okay, it's primarily a container, but I also see the impact on differences, and exchanges, sometimes we can look at that and that tells us to some extent the magnitude of the impact there. If you're changing something that sounds pretty much like one of these, maybe only a minor intervention. If you're doing something that's going to impact, if you're going to make a change that's going to impact all three, much more likely a stronger intervention. And you have to decide, are you trying to make a strong intervention or are you just trying to make a minor intervention with your team? Okay? So here's what I'd like you to do. Let's take, 6-7 minutes, or maybe 10 minutes. I'll look at our timing here. But form up into some groups, just a couple of you next to each other, and talk about one, maybe two of the other situations on there. We'll get back together in a few minutes and share these and see if we can have some answers for at least one or two more of these others. So talk about those for a few minutes in your groups. Got it figured out.
Working together there.
Well, that's what. Okay, let's start up again. See how we do here. I know we're all shy, but let's see if we can at least talk about one or two of these. Do we have a group that'll volunteer to tell me what possible interventions you came up with for one of these problems? We have a group that'll help us out. One of our discussions. Thank you. Which one did you guys talk about?
Number 2.
Number 2. This is failing to deliver potentially shippable code. What might you do there?
One suggestion would be to have the product owner sit closer to the developers,
Okay.
so they would know better if the feature is actually done or not.
Okay. Have the product owner sit closer to the team. What do you think we're changing there? Is that primarily a container difference or exchange?
Well, it's a container and an exchange.
Yeah. So we're changing the container. We're bringing the product owner closer in with the team. We're introducing a new exchange. We're having the product owner talking with the team more frequently. Right? So we've got some new exchanges going on there. Right? What about another one? Anybody talk about 3, 4, 5, or 6? Let's get one more. Get another comment or two. I appreciate your comments on that one. Thank you. One more. Yes, thank you.
We had a short discussion on number 5.
Number 5. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, we didn't discuss that much, but we had a suggestion of doing it in the sprint plan meeting, doing it a bit like in a poker plan meeting.
Uh-huh.
That everyone has to give their estimate, and then you discuss to get the median or whatever. You land on a common ground.
Okay, so introduce something like planning poker as a different way to estimate. Planning poker is a consensus-based approach to estimating. Everybody holds up a card all at once. Something we'll be talking about, I think, in the next section I'm doing after lunch. So we might do that to help avoid the influence that Jeff is having by being so domineering. This is actually a real one I worked with. That is one of the things we did there, so thank you for that. And again, a lot of these... the way I use this is a lot of times when I'm consulting to companies, I've seen a problem before, and okay, what did I do before? And I remember what I might have done with a previous company, and did it work, and does this situation seem similar, and I'll know what to do. So I'll use it that way. But if I don't know what to do, if I'm seeing something that I haven't seen, or I'm trying to think through possible solutions, thinking through the containers, differences, and exchanges that exist in that company, I find helpful as a thinking tool. Okay, what containers are here? What containers could I change? Right? Who's talking that, who's not talking maybe should be? What exchanges could I introduce? And so I'll think about it that way. So sometimes I use this as a thinking tool with some of the teams I'll work with when I try to find interventions, way to influence them. Okay? I want to shift and talk about kind of the second main topic here, which is how to influence how a team evolves. So teams have what's called a self-organizing path. The way a team is self-organized today is different than how they are going to be self-organized tomorrow, and a team moves along this path. Right? Self-organization is not something you can put on a Gantt chart, right, and say, okay, we're done self-organizing, check that off. Right? It constantly happens. Right? Teams self-organizes constantly. So we have to be aware of directing the team, guiding the team to better and better levels of fitness with their environment. I want to quote Philip Anderson again one more time from this Biology of Business book. So I'll read you this quote here. He says, self-organization proceeds from the premise that effective organization is evolved, not designed. It aims to create an environment in which successful divisions of labor and routines not only emerge, but also self-adjust in response to environmental changes. So we adjust to our environment. He says this happens because management sets up an environment and encourages rapid evolution toward higher fitness, not because management has mastered the art of planning and monitoring workflows. So again, management's job, leadership's job, is to set up an environment where this can happen, where the team is able to rapidly evolve, rapidly adjust to their environment. We don't pre-plan it, right? So team evolution, if we think about evolution, evolution is a result of three things: variation, selection, and retention. And let's not think about a team first. Let's think about something easier like a giraffe, right? A giraffe has a random mutation that leads to a longer neck, right? That is variation. We randomly varied, right? Selection means that random variation actually turned out to be a good thing. That giraffe could survive where others couldn't. Retention is where evolution has that giraffe species continue to have that long neck. The mutation is passed along to descendants. So for evolution to occur, we need variation. We're going to need changes to happen. We're going to have to select among those. We have to have a way to select among those. And we're going to have the best to be retained. Variation, selection, and retention. Now, Anderson, in one of his articles, wrote about 7 levers for influencing how a team evolves. And so I want to touch on some of these levers here. The first one is select the external environment, right? Things that you can do to influence how a team evolves is you can adjust their external environment. This is very similar in some ways to the containers we had of the earlier discussion, right? But it's more than just the physical environment, right? Sometimes we can adjust the business we're in or the definition of the business we're in. I remember the first time I went to work with Yahoo, this was back in 2003 or 2004, right? Yahoo, think about how you think of Yahoo. Right? Think about how you would define Yahoo. And I go out there 2003, 2004, and they tell me we're a media company. Like a media company, right? And, they were in the process of gradually moving headquarters and all key employees down to Southern California. They're going to be in Hollywood. Right? We're a media company. We create media for the web. I was like, you're not a media. You're a kind of second-rate search engine at this point, right? You're a technology company. Right? And I think this is part of what Yahoo has struggled with over the last 8-9 years, right? Figuring out their identity. But they went for years where they had this CEO who said, we're a media company, right? And so we can think about the external environment. Now, a lot of us cannot influence that, but I want to just touch on this one in case some of us can. Right? Some of our companies are innovators, others are fast followers. Right? What type of influence do we have on how we view our company? Second thing that we can do, and hopefully more of us have influence over this, is define what is good performance. Right? What is acceptable? What is good performance in your company? Right? What messages do you send if you cancel training? Anytime there's a crisis, we cancel training. Right? Think about the type of message that sends. It sends a message that we value the short term over the long term. Right? I had a boss. Many of us have had a boss like this. This boss thrived on chaos, and he loved it when employees rose to the occasion during chaos and put out fires, even if they were the ones who caused the fires, right? And so we've often had bosses like that who love that firefighting capability, right? And so that just encourages employees to create fires so they can be the ones to put them out, right? So what do you define? What do you as a leader define as good performance? What are you rewarding as good performance? Right? The things that we reward, the things that we praise and talk about in the company, those will be the things that teams move towards. So I want to make sure teams are moving in the right direction. Manage meaning. What becomes meaningful in your organization? Right? What type of stories are told in the company? Right? What type of stories get passed around? Those stories, again, influence what people value and what they respond to. I live in Boulder, Colorado. I got invited into what to me would have been a fantastic client. They're about 5 miles from my house. They're a medium-sized division of a very large company, and we're going to be an absolutely fantastic client. And I go there, and I'm spending the entire day giving them some advice, and they're kind of interviewing me to see if they want me to hang around for the long term, do a long-term engagement with them. And man, do they have problems. This is going to be a great client to have. And I get to the end of the day, and I've heard about this new general manager they've got. And the guy sounds, I'm not real wild about the stuff I've heard. But I get to the end of the day, and I've already decided I don't want to work with these guys because it's going to be hopeless. I'm not going to be able to help them. And I get to this, I'm supposed to have a meeting at 4 o'clock with the general manager, and I go meet with the human resources director because the GM's too busy to meet with me. He's going to be late. And the human resources guy is just kind of babysitting me for a little while. And he starts telling me stories about this general manager and how great he is. And one of the reasons he's so great is because he goes out in the parking lot at 5 o'clock every day, typical U.S. quitting time, and counts the cars. Right? And he wants to, this human resource guy is trying to impress me because this GM counts the cars. And isn't that great? He's making people work late by counting the cars. And I just wanted to kind of shock the guy, and I said, oh, that's fantastic. He goes out there at 5 o'clock and he counts the cars. And then what does he do? Come in and find anybody who's working too late and sends them home? And this human resource guy goes, no, he wants them here late. He wants them here late. Right? What type of culture is this setting up when you know your boss is out counting the cars at 5 o'clock? Right? It's a horrible thing. I had another company I worked at where we actually had a story that was getting passed around that I thought was fantastic. The company was a small company that was public and was finally going to be profitable. The company had gone public before being profitable and was going to finally make a profit this quarter. Maybe they were going to make a profit this quarter. It depended if we could keep costs in check. As long as we kept costs down, this company was going to make money. It was going to be real close. The company was either going to make a little bit or lose a little bit. But that first quarter in which you cross over and you're now profitable is huge, right? And whether we make $1,000 or lose $1,000, that is a huge difference. And it's going to be really close. And so we have this all-company meeting. And the CEO stands up in front of the whole company and is stressing the importance of keeping costs down, right? Don't buy office supplies. You can buy them 3 weeks from now if you need them. Right? Do not buy office supplies. Don't book any business travel. We're trying to be profitable. And then here's the key part of what he told us. He said, while this meeting is going on, I have the janitors going to every bathroom in our building. They are taking out the nice, comfortable 2-ply toilet paper and removing it and putting in cheaper 1-ply toilet paper. right? I'm sure this cost him more money than it saved by going to cheaper toilet paper. But I remember him saying, he said, that I want everybody in here thinking about profitability at least one time a day, right? It's like, really interesting message, but he got his point across, right? And the company did achieve their profitability. So what becomes meaningful in your company? What type of stories get passed around? Another thing we can do to help evolve, pick people, right? Now we're back to a little bit into the container difference exchange thing, talking about some of the people involved. So think about who we want on the team. I'll give you one other story about somebody I put on a team one time. I had a team that was, they weren't doing too well. And I remember I put a person on the team, I put a programmer on the team who was not one of the better programmers. I don't know what it was about this guy. His name was Mark, but he was like glue. I considered him like glue. He would keep a team together. And I had a team that was fighting. They'd been put together through an acquisition. And this one programmer, Mark, he just had a great personality. He was the one that people were always going over to his house after work and on the weekends and things like that. And I looked back on teams that he had been on. I'd worked with this company for a handful of years. And nobody ever left when Mark was on the team. He just had a personality that kept people together, just a real friendly guy. And so I put him on that team, and he said, what is my job on this team? And I said, basically, to be the glue. I want you to keep this team together, right? We have this team that's coming together from an acquisition. They hate each other, and you're just such a nice guy. People always get along with you, and your job is to help make sure this team stays together through the rest of this project, right? So we think about who we're putting together on a team. One of the questions we often get is, should a team have the right to decide who's on them? I'm okay with companies deciding to give that power to a team, but it's not something I normally do. I normally do not let teams have the right to decide who are team members. I'm much more of a fan of keeping this as part of management's responsibilities, because this is one of the primary ways that leadership in an organization gets to influence self-organization. Right, so I'm not a big fan of kind of abdicating that, giving that to teams, but I have done that on teams that I would put pretty far up the maturity level. Okay, a couple other things that we can do to influence self-organization. Reconfigure the network. Right, reconfiguring the network refers to having different paths of communication, different types of conversation occurring, right, and to introduce or remove flows. Right. I want to show an example of what I'm thinking about here. Imagine you have a team in two locations. You have a team here, and you have a team back home where I live in Denver. So half your team in Oslo, half your team in Denver. A very common way to structure that team would be as shown here. We would have a team in Denver, we would have a team in Oslo, and they would just coordinate their work. But they would be essentially separate teams. Now there's some danger to that. Right? There's a little bit of possibility of us and them mentality creeping in here. Right? So there's some danger here. So another possible way of constructing that team, assuming we have the right skill sets in each city, would be to do this. Would be to have what we call a deliberately distributed team. Have half the team here in Denver, another team that's half here, half in Denver. So have two teams that are equally distributed. Right? So I know our common reaction is to look at this and say, I'll do the top one. I'll have an intact team in Oslo, an intact team in Denver. Right? But sometimes that leads to problems. And sometimes the way to get around that problem is to do the bottom picture here. So we reconfigure the network. We have different paths of communication. Right? I tend to think of this a little bit this way. If we do the top one, not a lot of day-to-day hassle. I don't got to get on the phone at a weird time of day. Not a lot of hassle in that top one, but a big risk of a blow up, right? We can have some us versus them problems. We can have some miscommunication. Of course, we do design by contract, but the two teams go in different directions. And then they find out they've gone later. They find out they've gone in different directions and things aren't working. So very little day-to-day hassle, but big chance of later problems. The bottom picture, a lot of day-to-day hassle, but not a big chance of any long-term problems. So I kind of think of that bottom one as a little bit like an insurance policy. I can do that bottom one. I'm going to be paying insurance premiums every day when I get on the phone at a weird time. I'm paying little insurance premiums to keep us in the right direction, but I don't have the big blow up. Right, now I'm not advocating either one. Right? I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying as much as I look at that top one and think by default that's how I'll structure teams, I often do it the bottom way for various reasons on a given team. Okay, so we can reconfigure the network in a slightly different way. Another thing we can do to influence our evolutionary path is to create what are called vicarious selection systems. Vicarious selection systems. Now think about it this way. Imagine you're thinking about Agile, you're thinking about doing some Scrum, but you're also thinking about Kanban, and you've also got some people in your company who love Waterfall. Here's the best way to resolve that dispute. Have a bunch of teams use Waterfall, have a bunch of teams use Scrum, have a bunch of teams use Kanban, have them develop products for the next few years, and at the end of, let's say, a 5-year period, let's figure out which of those sub-companies made more money. That's a very lengthy process to figure that out, a very lengthy and a very expensive experiment. Right? So we don't want to do an experiment like that. It's too expensive. So what we want to do is we set up vicarious, right, alternative selection systems. Right? And alternative selection systems are ones that can help us find out what ideas are good ones. Right? One of the best examples of a vicarious selection system is Google. And you've probably heard that Google has their 20% policy. Right? Every employee at Google gets to spend 20% of their time on whatever project or initiative they want. Now imagine you're a Google manager or a Google VP, and you see a lot of your developers flocking to work on a particular project. That's a pretty good indicator that project is going to be successful. People want this. My programmers and testers want to work on this. People want to work on projects that will be successful. Right? And that they would use themselves. And Google's audience is, a lot of it is their own people, right? They're kind of representative of their own audience, right? So when they see people flocking to those type of projects, that is an indicator that that might be a good idea. So what type of things can we set up in our companies to be vicarious selection systems? Retrospectives can help with this, right? Teams will start to identify the problem sooner, right? Last one I want to touch on here is energize the system. Pump energy into the system. It is amazing when you visit a team that is energized how much more they are getting done than a team that is not energized about their process. So one of the things we want to do is to make sure a team has a clear elevating goal. Right, a reference to a book called Teamwork, I think down there at the bottom. Another reference here is to make sure a team has an igniting purpose. This comes from a book by Linda Grattan at London Business School. And a team with an igniting purpose will outperform a team that doesn't. So part of our jobs as leaders is to help teams find what ignites their passion. Right? Now this doesn't, I always think of something like this. I always think of somebody like Steve Jobs, giving great keynote talks and getting his Apple employees so motivated. It doesn't have to be somebody as passionate, as inspiring as Steve Jobs. Right? As an example, let's take somebody who's nowhere near as inspiring as Steve Jobs. Let's think about somebody like Bill Gates. Right? Very successful business guy, but I don't think of him as giving the same kind of impassioned speech as Steve Jobs would do. Now let's flash back. 1993, Bill Gates says, we're not interested in the internet. Right? A little bit later, he realizes they need to be interested in the internet. And you probably have heard about a memo that he sent out. It wasn't even an email, it was a memo he circulated around Microsoft in 1995. It was called the Internet Tidal Wave Memo, where he got all of Microsoft riled up about the internet. Okay, this might have been Bill Gates' shining moment. Here was his big, passionate speech. Here's what he said. The internet is a tidal wave. It changes the rules. It's an incredible opportunity as well as an incredible challenge. I'm looking forward to your input on how we can improve our strategy. That is not very inspiring, right? Doesn't exactly say a whole lot. Any CEO I've worked with or worked for could have written that same memo. But that was the one that got Microsoft turned around and focused on the internet, right? So it doesn't have to be some amazing speech by a guy in a black turtleneck. Right? It can just be something that gets us all excited about whatever it is. It doesn't have to be all that, fiery. Right? I don't consider this to be a particularly fiery memo, but this turned Microsoft around on the spot. Okay? So 7 things we can do there to influence how a team moves through their evolutionary self-organizing path. Okay? Thank you all very much.